We've been hanging out in Job, rolling through the book, and we're getting near the end of the book, but it's going to be one of those things where we're going to spend a few weeks as we are looking at the book as a whole. This is the second divine discourse, is what people call it. It's the second God speech. And as I mention every week, one of the reasons why we have difficulty with Job is we read the first 3 chapters, and then we read the last 4 chapters. First 3 chapters we all know about. God comes before, or Satan comes before God with the sons of men, and they're parading themselves, and God says, have you considered Job? And Satan has all these things, well, you bought Job. If you didn't give him everything all the time, then he wouldn't love you. He only loves you because you bought him. And so God says, okay, prove it. And then he comes back, Satan, once again, and says, well, a man will give anything for his body. And so if you let me attack his body, he will curse you and die. And so God says, all right, we'll let you do it. And so we know that chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 is Job's lament. And then we get into Hebrew poetry, and we have these 3 friends with their speeches, and we have Job's return speeches, and we have Job's oath of innocence. We have Job's claim of wisdom in chapter 28. And then all this poetry messes with our minds. We're not much into it. Then Elihu speaks, and we're like, who in the world is this guy, and what is he saying? And so generally, we study the first 3 chapters, and then we study the last 4 chapters because we really like the part where God's speaking. But it's difficult to understand those last 4 if you have flown over all that stuff in the middle. So if you recall last week, 7 days ago, right? That's a long time. All right, 7 days ago, we talked about the first speech. And as you and I go through the first speech, you'll notice God comes to Job and he says, okay, gird up your loins like a man. We're about to fight. We're about to have a discussion here. But put your big boy pants on is what we'd say. And so he says, have you considered this animal and that animal and that animal? And so we, in our biological minds, are going, okay, yeah, you have this and this and this. And we see all those things. But as we get to the end of the speech, we don't talk about that speech much because it does not really make a lot of sense to us. Yes, God's in charge of all these things until you go back, and I don't remember, but it's in the notes of last week, I think it's chapter 36, where Job says, the Lord has left me and I'm in the wilderness along with the ostriches, and I'm in the wilderness along with these God-forsaken creatures. And so then when you remember that, you suddenly remember God's speech, and you see where God says, I'm in control of the world, and when I see that mountain goat, I know exactly when it's pregnant. I know exactly where it needs to go when it has a child. I know what it eats every day. I make sure it has enough to drink. I know them all by name. And when I see those ostriches, which are just the dumbest creatures ever, laying their eggs in the wrong place and half the time stomping their young, even though they're dumb, God says, I'm taking care of them. And so you go through all these creatures that we are living on the fringe of society. God says, I see them and I know them and I take care of them. Okay? So why is God telling Job that? Let me see what retention we have going on here. Why would Job bring up these creatures, or why would God bring up these creatures at the very periphery of society and say, I want you to know I'm taking care of them? What would that mean to Job? Yeah, he's saying God is saying to Job, you feel like you've been kicked out of society. You feel like since you've lost your place and you're ugly now with all these tumors all over your body, that nobody cares about you. I care about the entire creation. And so that's what that first speech is about. But you don't get that unless you have covered Job's speeches starting in chapter 28 and going to about chapter 35. And so because we lose the context there, we don't catch that coming up there. All right? So then we get to chapter 40 and 41. In chapter 40 and 41, once again, God says, okay, you see that I rule over creation. Verse 8, now I rule over God's justice. Job thinks that God is being unjust, just like we do. You get cancer. You get hit by a drunk driver. You have to take Algebra 2 in high school. And you're like, God, why did I ever deserve this? You know, what did I ever do to deserve this, right? Not just say that because Nathan's an algebra teacher. But you go through and you're like, what did I ever do to deserve this? Well, God comes to him and says, okay, you're talking about justice. Let's talk about who's in charge of justice and who gets to decide what's right and what's not. Well, guess who decides what's righteous and what's not? It's God, because God created the world. If God decided today that the color blue was really red, guess what would happen? Because he's in charge, right? Now, there's a lot of young people today, and maybe older people, that because of what society's telling us all the time, believe that the sexual rules that you read in the Bible aren't just, and that God should not judge us because of a way a person thinks he's made or whatever. Who gets to make up the rules of biology and who we are? God does. And so God's the one who picks all these things. God's the one who decides all these things. And Job this whole time is saying, God, I don't deserve this. Remember chapter 26? I need a righteous one. I need a redeemer to stand between me and God, because if I was able to talk to God, I could put him in his place. Because God, I don't deserve this. I sacrificed every day. I did everything right. Now we're going to see about justice and how justice works. All right? And then we get to speeches. We meet Behemoth, and now we meet Leviathan. Now, and we're going to cover this more so, maybe in 2 weeks, maybe next week, who knows. Look here in chapter 42, all right, and begin in verse 1. After this speech, all right, Behemoth, Leviathan, after the speech, Job answers the Lord and says, I know that you can do everything, and no purpose of yours can be withheld. You ask who hides counsel without knowledge. I uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Please listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself. And now he does what? You see it there? He repents. What have the three friends been trying to do to him this whole time and get him to do? Repent. And he keeps saying, I never did anything, right?
We're also trying to get him to admit he made a mistake.
He needed to admit that he deserved what happened to him.
Yeah, but he didn't.
And he didn't deserve it, and so he would have been going against God by repenting of a sin that he never committed. And so the whole time he says, I'm righteous, I have not sinned, but then he turns around and says, God, you have no right to do this to me. There's no reason why this has happened. All right, so overview. Now here is my question. 40 and 41, what did God say that caused Job to repent? And that's hard for me to ask because you haven't read it yet, or haven't read it freshly. Behemoth, okay? Leviathan. Something about those two creatures shows Job the power, majesty, and strength of God to the point that he realizes he has no place to talk to God about what justice is and what justice isn't. So what we've got to do, and this is going to take us 2 weeks. I hope to establish identity this week, and I hope to talk about chaos theory next week. Because what I hope to do, there's no telling where I go sometimes. I'm one of those Acts 8:4 preachers. You just go everywhere preaching the word. And get distracted. But that's what I hope to do. So, Behemoth, if you are your typical Job interpreter, Behemoth is a hippopotamus. And hippopotamuses look so cute and sweet. What creature in Africa kills more people than any other creature? It's not the lion. It's a hippo, all right? And it's the worst way to die. They chase you down and sit on you. Very bad way to die, okay? And they're mean as all get out. Who was the drug dealer over in Colombia that imported all the hippos? What was his name? Yeah, Pablo Escobar. He, he was trying to create his empire. He imported like 4 pet hippos. And now there's like 90 hippos that are just chasing all these Colombians everywhere. So they're trying to get rid of the hippos. But like I said, has nothing to do with the lesson, but I just go everywhere preaching the word. But that's something I always enjoy, that they're just over there. All right, so that is a classic. Leviathan, we like to talk about a crocodile because we're looking at the rows of teeth, we're looking at the armor in the back and those sort of things. Now, in modern parlance, starting in about 1980, you got Ken Ham up in Washington State, you've got Bert Thompson, now different people who run Apologetics Press, and they like this description because it doesn't really fit a crocodile and a hippo, and so they're like, dinosaurs. And if you look at it and squint, it's a dinosaur, all right? And they say, okay, here is proof that dinosaurs existed because Job knew about dinosaurs. And so you'll go through that. And we've got 2 books in the foyer that will tell you, this is dinosaurs. And that's okay. It's good guess as any, all right? Do you have to have dinosaurs in the book of Job to believe that dinosaurs ever existed? You don't, okay? It doesn't have to fit in the Bible to prove that it ever existed. Now, God created everything at the same time, okay? So be very careful when people are telling you about this age and this period and things such as that. All these critters were made in those 6 days. But nowhere in my Bible do I read about a tarantula, a woolly mammoth, a horny toad. Nowhere in my Bible do I read about a kangaroo. But did those animals exist? They absolutely did. And so don't feel forced to say, I've got to make Leviathan a dinosaur, otherwise I'm admitting dinosaurs never existed. God created all these creatures, and God used all these creatures for different purposes. Now, I've got all sorts of theories about why God created dinosaurs at the very beginning. And a lot of it is because I think before the flood, the earth was so luscious, there was so much vegetation, you needed something that would eat a ton of food every day. And you needed something to create paths, and biologically a lot of things were going on. Now, I think they survived the flood, but with the changes that happened, the environment changes, the carrier pigeons or whatever, everything changes as we go on through life. But there I am getting distracted talking about different things. So we've got to figure out who Behemoth and who Leviathan are. So let's go ahead and just read about these guys, okay? So here we are. Prepare yourself like a man. Let's go ahead and talk about the justice part. And yeah, I'm doing good. All right, let's talk about the justice. Look at chapter 40 and verse 6. Here's God coming out of the whirlwind. Prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, you shall answer me. Would you annul my judgment, condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Then adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and array yourself with glory and beauty, and disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place, hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in hidden darkness, and I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. All right. So what is God telling Job to do? He's like, oh, you want to control the world. You're going to tell me what's just and what's not just. So if you're going to do that, Job, what's your job to do? Can you create this storm I'm talking out of? Can you make those who are proud and those who are righteous or self-righteous, can you put them all in their place? Okay. So we're about to talk about very proud creatures. Very self-righteous creatures that we're about to talk about. And what's Job's answer going to be? Can Job create a storm? Can Job have the arm of God and control everything in this universe? Absolutely not. And Job's got to learn your place is here, God's place is here. You don't measure up. So now we need to display this to Job. All right? The first display is Behemoth. Let's check out Behemoth and see what he has to say, okay? Verse 15, okay? It's a large animal. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. Okay, made same time Job was. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his hips. His power is in his stomach and muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. Bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. He is first in the ways of God, and only he who made him can bring near his sword. Only one thing kills Behemoth, and who is that? God. All right? Now that's a creature right there. Who can kill Behemoth? All right? Not even the crocodile hunter. Only God can kill Behemoth. All right? Okay, the mountains yield food for him. The beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus tree. Okay, remember lotus? It creates all those crazy things in your mind. In a covert of reeds and marsh, the lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the rivers may rage. He doesn't care. He's not disturbed. He's confident through the Jordan gushes in his mouth, and he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. All right, so here we have a creature. And this creature is big and strong. He's got a tail. It is a massive, massive tail. And wrapped around those tails are two things of very, very strong muscle. In other words, all around here, he is very, very strong. No one compares to this beast, to what this beast can do. And this beast can only be put down by God. And this beast is always hungry. All right, I have a dog. I've not tried hard enough, but I think he could eat 24 hours a day. You give him a treat, he begs for a treat. You feed him, and he's like, okay, what's next? Okay? I mean, I've raised a lot of boys, and this dog is ahead of all. They just eat, right? This thing eats and eats. He eats on the mountains. He eats in the valleys. He eats everywhere, okay? And you can't kill him. Only God can kill him. So that is some kind of creature which is there. We've got to figure out what that creature is. But first, let's go ahead and check out Leviathan. Leviathan's 34 verses. Oh, it's long. Can you draw out Leviathan, verse 1, with a hook and snare his tongue with the line which you lower? Leviathan's a sea creature, by the way. Can you put a reed through his nose and pierce his jaw with a hook? Or can you go fishing for him? Will he make many supplications? Will he speak softly? Will you make a covenant? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as a bird? Will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet for them? Will they apportion him with the merchants? In other words, can you tame Leviathan? Can you make him to be your pet? Can you put him in a fence or put him in a cage and listen to him sing? The answer is no. This thing is wild. Okay, what about killing this thing? Verse 7, can you fill his skin with harpoons, lay his head on fishing spears? Can you lay your hand on him? Remember the battle, never do it again. If you ever tried it once, he says you'd never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. So then, who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven. That's what this Leviathan is saying. Everything under heaven is mine. All right? Now remember that. That's his attitude. If it's not God, I rule it. Okay? Imagine who this could be. All right? I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, graceful proportions. Who can take off his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? The rows of scales are his pride, shut up as tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They stick together, and they cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning bright lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes out of his mouth. All right. So this crocodile is shooting fire. All right. So you're thinking medieval age. You've got a dragon which is breathing fire. All right. And that's where a lot of this medieval age mythology came from, is this idea of a dragon or Leviathan. So this creature rules all of the earth, everything that's not God, He says, I'm in charge of. This creature is breathing fire and consuming everything. Okay? Keep that in mind and think about where you read about those things in the Bible. Okay? His breath kindled coals, fires. The strength is in his neck, and sorrows dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They're firm, and they cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as the lower millstone. He raises himself up, and when he does, the mighty are afraid because of crashings. They are beside themselves. Though sword reaches him, it cannot avail, neither the spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like rubble to him. Darts are just straw. In other words, you can't kill this thing. Undersides are sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep pot boil. He makes the sea like an ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair, and on earth there is nothing like him which is made without fear. He's not scared of anything. He beholds every high thing. And look at verse 34, that last statement here, okay? That last statement. He is king over all the children of pride. All right, so what rules the world under heaven? And what breathes fire? What cannot be killed by anything but God? And what is the king of all, or the father of all those who are liars and full of pride? Well, that's what it looks like. By the way, caveat. I think I may be the only one who believes some of the stuff I'm saying. Okay, so if you want to disagree with me, that means you are SMRT smart, as Homer Simpson would say, okay? So take all this with a caveat, because I'm like the only dude I know who thinks this, but it's my Bible class, But anyway, I think I've got some stuff that we're going to work through as we go through here, because I really believe that if God came to Job when he's talking about chaos, talking about anxiety, and talking about what's happening in his mind, 5 minutes, I really believe that if God came up to him and said, crocodiles, David or Job probably would say, okay, yes, I repent. Or if he came to him and said, there's a dinosaur, he would say, okay, Elihu didn't have it, but okay, I see a dinosaur. I am so sorry that I ever did this. But I think what's happening here is God's coming and talking about justice before Job, and he says, I want you to know I'm in charge of justice. And what has happened to you, I'm in charge of. Satan has gotten a hold of you, and if Satan's got a hold of you, let yourself know I'm in charge of Satan. Okay? Now, if you hold this Satan theory, like I said, I'm the only one in the world that holds it, I think. I'm going to meet somebody someday who does. It makes the book work wonderfully. Because guess what you have happening in the first 2 chapters? Satan before God. Look what you have happening in the last 2 chapters. Satan before God. And now the entire thing has happened, and it's proven that Satan was wrong in chapter 1 and 2, because Job has lost everything, and yet he is faithful to God no matter what. And a lot of Bible books are made chiastically, which what that means is they reflect each other. And so this would place the middle of the book in chapter 28 with the wisdom chapter. And so it makes the structure of the book work well. But like I said, I'm weird. So let's look elsewhere in the Bible to figure out Leviathan, okay? Job chapter 3 and verse 8, okay? Job talks about Leviathan as his world has collapsed and crashed and everything has come to the end. Job has lost his family. He's lost his wife is being obnoxious. He's lost his health. He's lost his children. Everything is gone. And he says, the God of chaos has entered into my life. And who is the God of chaos? He calls him Leviathan, okay? Isaiah 27:1 calls Leviathan a fleeing serpent, a twisting serpent, a dragon that is in the sea. All right? Head over to the book of Psalms, Psalm 27. Asaph, one of the wise men in the Psalms, speaks of God breaking the heads of the sea monsters and crushing the heads of Leviathan. Now notice that is plural. So think of a sea monster that has multiple heads, and God just grabs each one of them and crushes them. All right. Now you're hanging out in the book of Revelation, which is very symbolic. What happens in Revelation? You notice some of them have many heads and many crowns and different things like that. Some of that John may have taken out of Asaph's writings, but again, that's another lesson. I need to stay away from there. Psalm 104, 25 and 26. That's one of our favorite ones. God says, I've taken Leviathan, the greatest creature, and I created the ocean and just threw him in there, and it's his playpen. Whenever you wouldn't have done this. But if your kid ever behaved, before the days of the iPad, where you just stuffed an iPad in their lap, if your kids ever misbehaved, you just put them in the playpen. There you are in the playpen, and now I can vacuum and do laundry, and you are just stuck there. And that passage there says God has taken Leviathan, and Leviathan's acting crazy and acting bad. Here's your playpen. This is where you're going to hang out. Okay? And so, as you know, God speaks of doing that several times. Revelation 12:9 and 20 verse 2, when he's talking about Satan, it looks a lot like this dragon, which is here, and those sort of things which are happening. And so, if you look at it holistically and bring all the passages of the Bible, and I've left out about 5 because I'm trying to hurry, they all kind of look like not a mythological creature, but they look like this creature going against. So if you have this as Leviathan, you have Behemoth being the Canaanite god Mot. This is a grim reaper. And the idea there in the eastern part where Job is from is death was just walking through. Imagine you're in a field of grass and there's this big cow. And no matter what you do, whether you grow tall, whether you grow short, whether you lean right, whether you lean left, that cow's going to come and chomp you eventually. And their idea was the god of death, Mot, would just come through, and every one of us is going to go through the same thing. And so people who are really into this like to go to the 2 different beasts in Revelation, the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth, and how they'd work together. And I better be quiet because I'll be more confusing, and we're out of time. But we'll cover this more next week, looking at the idea of the God of chaos. If you got questions, let me know. It's a great subject to play with, and I'll see you tonight.